An elderly man, his shoulders straight despite his years, walks slowly up the steps of the Providence Municipal Court. He's wearing a faded military cap, and his hands tremble as he grips the railing. Henry Peterson, 72 years old, looks like countless other veterans who have passed through these halls, but he is carrying a heavy, invisible burden, a secret hidden beneath his shirt sleeve for over 2 decades. What he is about to reveal in Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom will become one of the most profoundly emotional and defining moments of the judge's entire 4-decade career. But before we dive into this incredible true story of honor and sacrifice, I need you to please hit that subscribe button. We are racing towards our next goal, and 98% of the people watching this right now aren't yet subscribed. Where are you tuning in from? Comment your city below. Welcome to our community. Tuesday morning, November 8th. The familiar rhythm of Providence Municipal Court had settled in. Judge Frank Caprio, now 86 years old, had seen it all. In his 40 years on the bench, he'd handled every speeding ticket, every parking violation, and heard every excuse the human mind could conceive. The gallery was filled with the usual morning mix of defendants. But at 10 a.m., something different, something significant walked through those doors. Henry Peterson moved slowly, but with a deliberate, measured cadence down the courthouse aisle. At 72, he still held himself, with the unmistakable ramrod, straight bearing of a career military man. Even as time and circumstance had clearly taken their toll. His Vietnam veteran baseball cap was faded from the sun, but immaculately clean. His khaki pants were pressed with a sharp crease, his white shirt tucked in despite the noticeable tremor in his hands. But it wasn't just his military appearance that immediately caught Judge Caprio's discerning eye. There was a weight in Henry's eyes, a profound sorrow that went far beyond the typical anxiety most defendants showed. This was a man carrying something heavy, something that had absolutely nothing to do with a parking ticket. Lisa Martin, the court reporter who had been faithfully documenting Judge Caprio's cases for nearly 18 years, noticed Henry instantly. Unlike other defendants who fidgeted nervously, whispered to companions, or stared blankly at their phones, Henry sat in complete profound stillness. His weathered hands were folded neatly in his lap, but every so often one hand would rise and unconsciously touch his left forearm through his shirt sleeve. A repetitive, almost protective gesture. The other people awaiting their cases noticed him too. There's an unspoken language among veterans, and several others in the gallery nodded, respectfully in his direction, but Henry seemed lost in his own world, his eyes distant, fixed on a point far beyond the courtroom walls, as if watching a memory play out on a loop. When the bailiff officer Santos called the case at 10:45 a.m., his voice was clear. The State of Rhode Island versus Henry Robert Peterson, case number 2022, PV 9156, illegal parking in a handicap-designated zone. Henry stood with the careful, pained precision of someone whose body had endured wars, but whose discipline remained perfectly intact. "Please state your name for the record," Judge Caprio said, his voice carrying that gentle authority that had made him beloved by millions, a voice that invites honesty rather than demands it. "Henry Robert Peterson, Your Honor," he replied. His voice was steady but quiet, with the clipped, precise cadence of the career military softened by a lifetime in New England. "Mr. Peterson," the judge continued, "according to this citation, you parked your vehicle in a handicapped space at the VA Medical Center on October 15th without displaying the proper identification. How do you plead to this charge?" "Guilty, Your Honor," Henry said without a moment's hesitation. "I parked in that spot illegally, and I accept full responsibility for it." Judge Caprio paused, his pen hovering over the file. The detail of the VA Medical Center had immediately caught his attention. That, combined with Henry's obvious veteran status, made him sense that there was a much deeper story here. One hidden beneath the surface of a simple parking violation. "Mr. Peterson," he inquired, "I notice your veteran's cap. Which branch did you serve with the Army?" "Your Honor," he replied, "I served 2 tours in Iraq from 2003 to 2007. Henry's posture straightened just slightly as he spoke of his service. The pride was evident. a flicker of light in his otherwise pained expression. Judge Caprio felt that familiar, deep stirring of respect and curiosity. In his decades on the bench, he had learned time and time again that veterans often carried invisible stories, profound burdens, that went far beyond the minor cases, that brought them into his courtroom. Mr. Peterson, can you please explain the circumstances? That LED to this parking violation. The citation indicates you were at the VA Medical Center. Henry's composed, stoic expression flickered for the first time. Judge Caprio saw something pass across his face. It wasn't shame. It wasn't defiance, but something that looked like a tidal wave of barely controlled grief. Your Honor, he began, his voice tight, I was visiting. I was there for my regular monthly appointment with the VA psychologist. The parking lot was completely full and I just couldn't walk the extra distance from the regular parking area. My hands were shaking too badly that day. Judge Caprio noted the tremor in Henry's hands, which had indeed become more pronounced as he spoke. But more than that, he caught the immense weight in the veteran's voice. When he mentioned his psychological appointment, Mr. Peterson, if you don't mind my asking, do you have a disability that would normally qualify you for handicapped parking? Henry was quiet for a long, heavy moment. Judge Caprio could see him wrestling internally, struggling with how much to share in a public open courtroom. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of 2 decades of unprocessed pain. Your Honor, I have PTSD from my service in Iraq. The courtroom had gone completely, utterly quiet. This was no longer about a parking ticket. This was about a proud veteran's hidden, ongoing struggle with the invisible wounds of war and his pride in not wanting to be seen as disabled. Judge Caprio leaned forward, his gaze fixed on the man. Something in Henry's demeanor, the way he kept unconsciously touching his left forearm, that distant, haunted look in his eyes, the careful, precise way he chose his words, suggested there was still much more to his story. Mr. Peterson, 20 years is a long time to be dealing with post-traumatic stress. Can you tell me what happened during your service? That LED to these ongoing challenges. Henry's hand, as if of its own accord, moved involuntarily to his left forearm once again, squeezing it through the fabric of his shirt. Judge Caprio noted the gesture, which was becoming more frequent, more pronounced as the conversation deepened. Your Honor, Henry began, his voice dropping. I was a squad leader, 1st Infantry Division, my unit. We were responsible for convoy security and patrol operations out in the Anbar province. On March 15, 2006, he stopped, his voice catching my squad. Was conducting a routine patrol when our vehicle encountered an IED, a roadside bomb. The courtroom was now completely silent, frozen, listening intently. Your Honor. Henry continued, his voice beginning to crack for the first time. I lost my entire squad that day, 7 men. 7 young soldiers under my command. 7 men who trusted me, their sarge, to bring them home safely to their families. 20 years of survivor's guilt, held tightly in check, was now pouring out of him. I was thrown clear of the blast, but my men, they didn't make it. I was the only survivor. And for 20 years, Your Honor, I have been asking myself, every single day, why did I live when they didn't? Judge Caprio felt tears threatening his own composure as he processed the devastating, crushing weight of Henry's confession. This man had been carrying the guilt of surviving when all his soldiers had died for 2 long decades. Mr. Peterson, the judge said, his voice thick with empathy. I can see this is incredibly difficult for you to talk about. Is this why you've been seeing the VA psychologist for all this time? Yes, Your Honor, but talking about it's never made it easier. Every month I go to that appointment and The judge's eyes were drawn back to the man's hand, still clutching his left arm. Mr. Peterson. He interrupted gently. I've noticed you keep touching your left arm. Is there something there? Something that's connected to what you're sharing with us? Henry looked up at Judge Caprio, his expression one of pure surprise, and perhaps something that looked like relief. For 20 years, he had been carrying a visible secret that apparently No one had ever dared to ask about directly, Your Honor, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper after I came home from Iraq. I did something that my family, my wife, before she passed, even the VA counselors, none of them know about. Something I've kept hidden for 20 years. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. Judge Caprio knew, instinctively, that he was about to hear something sacred, a secret Henry had never shared publicly. What did you do, Mr. Peterson? Henry slowly, deliberately began rolling up his left shirt sleeve. His hands were shaking more noticeably now, trembling with the weight of the revelation. As the white fabric moved up his arm, intricate dark tattoo work became visible. Your Honor, he said, his voice trembling, I had all 7 of their names tattooed on my arm. Every single soldier who died under my command that day. Their names, their ages, the date they died, and a small cross for each one. The courtroom gasped collectively, a quiet sound of awe and sorrow, as Henry revealed a stunning memorial tattoo that covered his entire forearm. 7 names etched in elegant solemn script, each surrounded by small, respectful military insignia, creating a permanent physical tribute to his fallen soldiers. But that's not all, Your Honor, Henry said, his voice breaking. He reached into his wallet with those same trembling fingers and pulled out a small worn photograph, its edges soft and frayed. The image faded. This is Sergeant Michael Davis. He was my point man, my closest friend in the unit. Just 22 years old, married to his high school sweetheart. He had a new baby daughter he had never ever gotten to meet. Judge Caprio could see that the photograph had been carried for so long, held so often, that it was worn almost transparent at the creases. Your Honor, Henry whispered Michael. He made me promise him something. Right before we went out on that final patrol, he grabbed my arm and he said, Sarge, if something bad happens to me, promise me you'll never let people forget us. Promise me you'll remember all of us. Henry's voice broke completely then, and 20 years of suppressed grief washed over him, and I did, Your Honor. I promised him every month. When I see Dr. Evans, she asks me about my survivor's guilt. She asks me why I can't move forward, but I can't tell her about the tattoos or about this photograph, or about the promise I made, because then she'd want me to let go. To let go of Michael and of all the others, but letting go. Letting go would mean breaking my promise to my dying soldier. Judge Caprio realized he was witnessing one of the most heartbreaking, profound examples of loyalty, honor, and love he had ever encountered in his entire life. Henry Peterson had been carrying not just the crushing weight of survivor's guilt, but the sacred, agonizing weight of a promise to never, ever forget his fallen brothers. Mr. Peterson, the judge asked gently, on the day you received this parking ticket, what was your state of mind when you went to your VA appointment? Your Honor, Henry replied, it was October 15th. The 20th anniversary of the IED attack. Dr. Evans, she was pushing harder than usual, you know? Telling me to move forward, to accept that it wasn't my fault, but how can I ever accept it wasn't my fault when I was their squad leader? It was my fault. Henry's hand moved to his forearm again, this time pulling his sleeve up further as if to show the names to the entire room. Your Honor, after my appointment that day, I was so shaken up. I could barely walk. My hands were trembling so badly I couldn't get my keys out. I couldn't see clearly through my tears. I just needed to get to my car before I completely broke down in the middle of that parking lot. That's why I parked in the handicapped space. Not because I wanted special treatment. Not because I think I'm better than anyone, but because I was falling apart and I couldn't walk any further. Judge Caprio stood up from his bench, a slow, deliberate movement he rarely made during proceedings. The sheer weight of Henry's story of his 20-year vigil had moved him beyond the formal constraints of his judicial role. Mr. Peterson, he said, his voice thick with emotion. In 40 years on this bench, I have never encountered a story that so perfectly, so painfully illustrates the true meaning of brotherhood, of loyalty, and of profound sacrifice. He walked around his bench, abandoning his position of authority to address Henry directly, not as a judge to a defendant, but as one human being recognizing another's profound, heartbreaking dedication. You have spent 20 years. The judge continued, his voice breaking slightly. Honoring a sacred promise you made to a dying friend. You have carried their memory not just in your heart, but on your very skin, Mr. Peterson. He said, his voice rising with moral conviction. I want everyone in this courtroom to understand what we are really looking at here. We are looking at a man who has turned his own body into a living, breathing memorial for his fallen brothers. We are looking at someone who has kept a sacred promise for 2 decades, even when it meant carrying a level of unbearable, unimaginable pain and guilt all alone. He paused, letting his words carry to every person present. Mr. Peterson, he said, regarding the parking violation that brought you into my courtroom today. All charges are dismissed, all fines are waived. This citation is being removed from your record as if it never existed. The courtroom erupted into spontaneous, heartfelt, tearful applause. But Judge Caprio wasn't finished. He held up a hand. But more than that, he said, looking directly at Henry, I want you to know something. The promise you made to Sergeant Davis, that was not a burden you should ever have to carry in secret. That was a sacred vow, a vow that honors everything that is right and true about military brotherhood. He turned towards the gallery. We live in a society that is often quick to tell our veterans to move on, to get over their experiences. But Henry Peterson shows us today that some promises are too sacred to be broken, and some memories are far too important to ever forget. The applause continued as Judge Caprio made one final statement. Mr. Peterson, I want you to go back to Dr. Evans, and I want you to show her that tattoo. I want you to tell her about the promise you made to Michael Davis. Because honoring your fallen brothers, he said, his voice thick with emotion, is not an obstacle to your healing, it is your healing. We've reached the end of the video. Thank you all for watching. We are trying to spread the kind heart and compassion of the legendary Judge Frank Caprio throughout the world, but no one is supporting us. We ask for your support. We would be very happy if you subscribe to our channel, like our videos, and share your thoughts in the comments.